We've got an update that many of you have been asking for quite some time. St. John Hunt, the son of E. Howard Hunt, explaining how JFK was assassinated. With the audio tape of what had been termed by Rolling Stone the deathbed confession, you kind of pushed away from that, although I've heard that used since then. You kind of preferred to think of it as kind of a testimonial of the last testimony of E. Howard Hunt.
Is testimonial or something
right.
like that. 60 Minutes got wind of the story, and they flew me down to San Francisco, and they were, I sat and had lunch and then dinner with one of their executive producers down there, and he was, I played him the tape and I showed him the memos, and and he was very, very, very interested. He goes, "Oh, this is a major story. We are totally going to go with this. We want to fly you to New York, or we're going to send a crew out here." And then, I gave him the information, and I gave him copies of everything, and, just right on the table. Here it is. This is what he said, and this is for you to examine. They had, voice analysis done. They had handwriting analysis done. Everything was 100%. And as the weeks went by, it was like, well, we're not going to go with the story now. This excuse and that excuse, and I find that.
What were the excuses?
In this type of situation, the way the major media handles a story like this sometimes, especially this kind of story, which is very controversial to a lot of people, is that they just don't handle it. They just don't go there.
Your credibility part, that's the part I don't get, because, they'll be like saying, hey, that Zapruder guy, he's not credible. Okay. Right. Well, it's fine. He was holding the camera that the camera captured the film.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't. The fact that he was holding the camera doesn't really mean that the film's not credible.
Yeah,
just because he wasn't a journalist.
Yeah. The tape is credible. Because it is just what it is. And it's not. The source. People may say, well, I'm not credible because I freely admitted in a Rolling Stone article that I have made some mistakes in the past. I have a.
Let me just say, St. John Hunt, I don't care if you're doing cocaine as we speak. It doesn't have anything to do with the tape. If the tape has been analyzed, it is E. Howard Hunt. If the voice print analysis works, if the handwriting analysis is a dead-on match.
Yeah, I know. Well, I appreciate your support, and you're absolutely right in my opinion. That's what should be looked at is the tape itself, and there's a lot more going on I think than I certainly am aware of. Another example would be the Los Angeles Times. Sent a writer up, Carol Williams, all the way to Eureka, and we did a 6-hour interview with her. And then, it was going to be a major feature and this and that, and after about a month, a little column came out saying, well, E. Howard Hunt may have had last tale to tell, I think was the byline of the story, and they just really used that podium as a smear on my brother and myself, saying that we weren't credible, and this kind of stuff. So I think that there's, I'm not big on saying that this is a conspiracy, to a media conspiracy. I'm not a conspiracy enthusiast per se, but you have to wonder. The major news media isn't even touching this.
Can we wonder? And let me tell you what happened the last time I had this conversation on Coast to Coast, and I kind of threw it out there. And really, what it comes down to is something that your dad talks about on the tape, which I think is unnerving for people. Is the ramifications of what your dad's confession really indicates is that the U.S., at least at one time, was no better or no worse than the most unstable banana republic. And that we had, although a non-CIA sanctioned hit, a hit on a sitting U.S. president, a duly elected U.S. president, which was orchestrated by powerful people within the government or contracted by the government, and that many people within the government knew about it at the time and made a decision that the greater good would be served to lionize JFK, make him out to be a fallen hero, make him out to be they probably bit their lip on all of the talk about him, being canonized as for sainthood.
Yeah.
And they sat by and they knew that they had removed somebody they didn't like, just like some, cigar chomping colonel in some jungle somewhere deciding to take out the president and install their own dictatorship.
I know. That is absolutely the most poignant factor about this whole thing, is that that's exactly what his tape and his admissions to me say to the world in general. And that's that's an issue that is so mind-bogglingly huge,
right,
that it's just, how does anybody really put their head around something that huge and that significant? So
it's too earth-shaking to think that we aren't what we think we are.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to be the one that validates the truth of that. That we would prefer the murder mystery to continue.
Yeah.
Than to see the truth of that. Not to mention the number of people who have made it a personal industry to keep the mystery alive.
That's right.
Or other authors that have their own books out, which is really ironic. I mean, Vincent Bugliosi is getting a ton of airplay and a ton of interviews on television for his book, which says that it was just one person.
Yeah.
Right?
I saw Vincent Bugliosi, and the other guest was my good friend David Talbot, published his book called Brothers, The Secret Years of
Kennedy Years, right.
Yeah, of the Kennedy brothers. And boy, they just ganged up on him. It was just brutal. I mean, he couldn't even get a word in edgewise. And Bugliosi, just, being the incredible lawyer that he is, I mean, he just was hammering away, I mean, how could a man of that education, I was wondering, make a statement like there is no indication that Lee Harvey Oswald had any connections with any kind of intelligence agency ever, or any kind of mob affiliations. I mean, how could someone that's intellectually sharp...
And not even sure why Bugliosi is writing this book. After Case Closed, Poser's book, Bugliosi goes, I don't believe there's a tape. Just happen to have the tape right here. So he plays it for him. And then what does Bugliosi say afterward? I don't know whether he Googled it. I don't know however he came up with it. Afterward, he goes, St. John Hunt's not a credible source. And I thought, okay, again, that is just the weirdest little Texas two-step to pull around the fact that E. Howard Hunt is the one on the tape, not you.
Right. If there was no tape, if there were no memos, and it was just me coming out to the public and just saying, well, my father told me this and that, then someone could make a case or, put in a question mark and say, well, that's a very interesting story, Mr. Hunt, but we don't feel you're credible because you have no evidence. There's nothing to back your story up. But
that same bludgeon of no credibility.
Yeah, as if he knows me.
Yeah, right, exactly.
He's never sat down and had a conversation with me. I've never emailed him. I mean, we've never had any kind of dialogue whatsoever. His really lack of intellectual skills by saying something like that.
Again, it would be like going back and saying, well, Zapruder ran a dress shop.
Yeah.
So what does he know about assassinations? Well, that's kind of adds to it, the fact that he's sort of the innocent bystander. All right. Well, to your credit, St. John Hunt, I field a lot of email about you, and I'm always sending people to your website and linking them up so they can hear the tape when they were asking about it. But one of the things that people emailed about that were critical, again, were saying, oh, well, St. John Hunt is, he's put it on a website. So, I don't know, that doesn't have any credibility to me. And I'm thinking, why? You weren't charging $19.95 to listen to the tape on the website. It's free on the website. You have to turn off your audio to not hear it on your website, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that you have now for sale an interview DVD with you, in which you talk about it on the DVD, that's purely optional. Somebody doesn't have to buy the tape of you in order to hear the tape of your dad.
No, that's true. As a matter of fact, I've gotten one or two emails from people. One gentleman was very polite, and he said, "Well, it's obviously you're into this for the money," and I just politely emailed him back and I said, the truth be told, I have not made one penny on this. I said, I'm not offering any of my dad's testimony for sale. I'm not this is not a bait and switch situation or let's hook them and then let's charge them, type thing.
Right.
If someone wants to hear my personal story which is what I'm offering on the DVD. My personal recollections of my life growing up, my family life, my relationship with my father, both pre-Watergate and during Watergate and after Watergate, the circumstances at which he gave me this information and our relationship during that time.
You're offering it to history. You're offering it to the world for free at a free website.
Yeah.
You can go and you can look at the handwritten memo and listen to E. Howard Hunt at the same time.
Yeah.
This was a tape that arrived to you, but your father had asked that you hold on to it until he died.
Yes.
It took 3 more years before your father passed on, and after which you've released the tape. Pretty simple equation.
Yes.
Okay.
I did not ask him to put anything on tape. I was not expecting this in the mail, so it was a big surprise when I got this.
And then I want to get back to something I read which pertains to this from William F. Buckley, which I thought was fascinating. All CIA, either fellow agents like himself or operatives that were hired on a contract basis, they have often, I think with the exception of one person on the tape, they have already, over the course of the last 30 years or so, been linked to the JFK assassination, just never confirmed. And your father, in fact, had gone to lengths to disconfirm, if you will, any truth to this thought that he was involved in the conspiracy, which he now admits to here on Coast to Coast AM. Here's E. Howard Hunt.
I heard from Frank that LBJ had designated Cord Meyer Jr. to undertake a larger organization while keeping it totally secret. Cord Meyer himself was a rather favored member of the Eastern aristocracy. He was a graduate of Yale University and had joined the Marine Corps during the war and lost an eye in the Pacific fighting. I think that LBJ settled on Meyer as an opportunist, Perrin like himself, Perrin, and a man who had very little left to him in life ever since JFK had taken Cord's wife as one of his mistresses. I would suggest that Cord Meyer welcomed the approach from LBJ, who was, after all, only the vice president at that time. And, of course, could not number Cord Meyer among JFK's admirers. Quite the contrary. As for Dave Phillips, I knew him pretty well at one time. He worked for me during the Guatemala project. He had made himself useful to the agency in Santiago, Chile, where he was an American businessman. In any case, his actions, whatever they were, came to the attention of the Santiago station chief, and when his resume became known to people in the Western Hemisphere Division, he was brought in to work on Guatemalan operations. Sturridge and Morales and people of that ilk stayed in apartment houses during the preparations for the big event. Their addresses were very subject to change, so that where a fellow like Morales had been one day, you're not necessarily associated with that same address the following day. In short, it was a very mobile experience. Let me point out at this point that if I had wanted to fictionalize what went on in Miami and elsewhere during the run-up for the big event, I would have done so. But I don't want any unreality to tinge this particular story, or the information, I should say. I was a bench warmer on it, and I had a reputation for honesty. I think it's essential to refocus on what this information that I've been providing you, and you alone, by the way, consists of. What is important in the story is that we've backtracked the chain of command up through Cordmeyer and laying the doings at the doorstep of LBJ. He, in my opinion, had an almost maniacal urge to become president. He regarded JFK as he was, in fact, an obstacle to achieving that. He could have waited for JFK to finish out his term and then undoubtedly a second term. So that would have put the LBJ at the head of a long list of people who were waiting for some change in the executive branch.
I was talking to a friend of mine who is in the news media in New York, and I been kind of bouncing this off him since the story first came up, the opportunity to talk to you first came up. And he's very much part of the mainstream media. And I was just saying, well, what do you think about this part? Or he would say, well, that if I were running a news department looking at the story, here would be my questions. And then I would answer those questions. I would satisfy those questions. And then I'd say, well, what about this? And all in all, I mean, it just seems like there's a lot of mainstream suspicion about this story in a way, almost because it's just too simple. I mean, it's the fact that E. Howard Hunt is laying it all out, names the names, and brings it back to LBJ just seems, I think, to be almost too good to be true. And that's one of the reasons why the mainstream news media is not touching it.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. I don't know that why the news media would shy away from something handed to them on a silver platter, other than, the powers that control the news media are still, influenced in some way, by the people, in the government that don't want, this is a huge stain on the American,
right.
Talk about credibility, for Christ's sake. This is a huge stain
right.
on the credibility of the American government, at least in that time period.
In that limited sense, though, that at least some people within the American government knew about it.
Yeah.
And that your father goes to such lengths to establish, as a former military man, that chain of command, that nefarious chain of command.
Yeah.
That brought it back, that gave him the permission to feel like he was doing the country's work in assassinating the president. What else have you heard from other people who say they can corroborate a piece of it?
Well, I would have to say that the most interesting and certainly verifiable piece of information that has come my way was an email I got from a fellow by the name of Douglas Caddy. Now, anybody that's kind of a Watergate buff knows that Douglas Caddy was my father's first attorney during the early period of his Watergate defense. Douglas Caddy also happens to have been also the attorney of a gentleman named Billy Saul Estes. Was told by Billy Saul Estes that LBJ was in fact one of the prime movers and shakers, motivators, plotters in the assassination of President Kennedy, and that he felt that my father, was being absolutely truthful in this matter. And
how about that? That's very interesting, that especially somebody with that kind of credibility.
Yeah.
Now, would they be willing to go on the record in terms of like an affidavit or appearing with you on, 60 Minutes, or if somebody else contacts you, would he be willing to step up to the plate on this, or did he just send that to you sort of back channel to have you keep going?
Well, I don't know. I can't speak for Mr. For Mr. Caddy, but I can say that we do have a relationship, somewhat built on, the historical fact that he was my father's first attorney. I do recall meeting him back in those days. This is 1972, 1973. We do have, a remembrance of each other, and he does have this information that he said was totally supportive of what my father was revealing to me, and in turn what I'm revealing to the country.
Okay.
So, I think it could be easily a situation where he'd be easy to contact. I can certainly contact him and see.
I would. I'd get it. I'd sort of strike while the iron is hot on that, because if we look at the history of this story, since we've tried to move the needle on it on Coast to Coast AM and Coast to Coast Live, that it seems like suddenly, it just like in your own experience, people are very interested. Oh, put me down. I'd love to do something with it. You watch to see what we'll do with it. But very few people come through. It's so far it's Rolling Stone and us.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
If you are the problem, if St. John Hunt if your credibility is the problem, well, then fine, get past that and see who else is out there that can, in the case of this Mr. Caddy or others, that can verify the story one way or another.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's a good path to follow, I think.
Well, I took a couple of stabs at the internet trying to find an article I had found a few weeks ago, written by William F. Buckley in regard to E. Howard Hunt, and in it, he freely admitted it was a piece that was published around January when your dad died, and in it he flat out said that he had withheld the foreword to your father's book, the book that he had been writing, the book that you had even been talking to him about, that he withheld the writing the foreword to the book until your dad took out that, I think the word he used, I couldn't find it, I think the word he used was kooky, claims about him knowing who was involved in the assassination of JFK. And I thought that was so bizarre that here in the piece written in January, I thought it was a New York Times piece. It could have been National Review. It could have been Wall Street Journal. I was just trying to grab it. That he flat out said that your father back then had told him in the manuscript that he had sent him about the plot to kill JFK. And William F. Buckley said, you put that in the book and I won't write the foreword to it.
Well, that's true. And it's very interesting to think about that, because that book, American Spy, came about because I started talking to my father a few years ago about putting his truthful memoirs down as a legacy, and also, hopefully, if we could find a publisher. So, in contact with my co-writer, a JFK researcher and a good friend who also worked with Oliver Stone. His name is Eric Hamburg. He worked with Oliver Stone on the Nixon movie, and on Any Given Sunday, another Stone movie. And he's a very well respected, a very bright guy named Eric Hamburg in Los Angeles. In any event, Eric and I flew down to Miami to interview my father, and to get all this stuff on videotape, which we did. We have about 10 hours of videotape. But the original, the idea for the book was for my father to sort of come clean and to sort of, lay the truth all out, about his life and everything. But of course, as time went on and the book came to shape, he wanted Uncle Bill, William F. Buckley Jr. to write the foreword to it, and when he got wind of that my father was going to speak about the JFK assassination, he flat out refused to do it unless that stuff was taken out. And of course, the book had to be approved by the Central Intelligence Agency prior to publication, and they wanted all that stuff out. So by the time the book was published, Eric and I had withdrawn from the project, and the CIA had blocked everything out, and the only way that any of the subject matter about JFK could eventually appear in the book, which it did, was in a very speculative nature. So really the information that I have to offer, the audio tapes and the memos, are all first person accounts of my father, right, that were originally intended for release in a book
in his lifetime.
We're working on.
It was originally intended to be released in his lifetime.
In his lifetime, yes, indeed.
But when somebody as powerful and who could help sell a book like William F. Buckley says, "I won't do it if you put that in there," what is he going to do? He's going to
not only Buckley but the CIA, my father's attorneys. Right. A lot of pressure.
Well, they can't stop it now. So I mean, it just goes.
No.
It just goes to show that it is not a matter of a son manipulating his father's memory or taking his father's image, and when a father can't say anything to stop him, trying to make a buck on it, because this is exactly the opposite. This is a dad turning to his son saying, get this out after I'm dead because I can't do it while I'm living.
That's absolutely the truth. Yep, that's a fact.
All right, we'll find out. We'll get all of the callers next, and the show is just amping up. There's a lot more to get to tonight with the feedback and some of the things we've learned about the E. Howard Hunt tape that you heard first on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Well, let's get everybody else on all of the investigators on the phone on Coast to Coast AM in for Art Bell. This is Ian Punnett with St. John Hunt. We go to the wild card line where John is hanging on for St. John Hunt. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, you asked why the media doesn't discuss these things and spikes them and kills these kind of stories. And I think it's significant that Rolling Stone ran this article, also ran a similarly powerful article back about 1982, in which Carl Bernstein of the Washington Post wrote a long article, almost the whole Rolling Stone, then, that all of the media had collaborated secretly with the Central Intelligence Agency in fabricating stories to justify U.S. foreign policy against the Soviet Union, Cuba, or any country that was on the CIA's hit list at the time, and was demonizing and fabricating stories to set countries up for attack. And this was in the Rolling Stone back then. And the former director of the CIA, his name escapes me. But during the Pike Committee hearings, he admitted that he had hundreds of agents throughout the media fabricating these kind of stories, assets and agents. Mark Lane, one of the major researchers into CIA involvement in the Kennedy assassination, got his Freedom of Information Act file, and he found out that the director of plans of the CIA had ordered all their agents throughout the media, New York Times, Washington Post, and all of them, to bash him, just as Bugliosi is bashing now. So I think we can begin to see that when anything reaches a certain level, beyond a certain ceiling, where people are going to wake up and realize that we're not living in a democracy, and that all of these war-mongering, scare-mongering plans, whether based on anti-communism or anti-terrorism, are really justified, are really a pretext to justify taking away our freedoms and to grab areas and resources and regions for domination and hegemony. Has nothing to do with protecting us. And I think we've got to bring it up, just as your science advisor said, to realize that all of these warmongering plans, Kennedy was going to get out of Vietnam. That would have saved 3 million lives. He was going to normalize relations with Cuba. We still have this insane embargo against Cuba. He was going to soften the Cold War and reorient towards domestic needs. All of these millions of lives lost, all of these wars, all these Iran-Contra, and now Iraq and possibly, even more catastrophically, Iran wars are really can be traced back to this military-industrial complex coup of Kennedy. And I think we got to realize we can't trust the media. It's not going to tell us the truth. The 911truth.org type sites are the only ones that are willing to tell us that. The Democrats, Republicans, media, CIA are all implicated in this, and they're not going to tell us this. Nixon.
Does that resonate with you?
Well, that absolutely does resonate with me. I think he's very well spoken, had a lot of very critical thoughts, well placed, well versed. Obviously knows his history, and I think it's interesting that perhaps we can gauge a story like this is its veracity or its impact, its seriousness, even by its nature, by the insignificance that the major media places on it.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. We can get everybody covering a tape of the Loch Ness Monster.
Right.
Everybody will run that, and they'll run it every half hour. Yeah. Because it's nice and frivolous, and it's kind of eye candy, and I think it's cool. By the way, I mean I'm sort of really into it, but it isn't. It's it isn't. It doesn't challenge anything.
Right. It doesn't challenge the status quo, and certainly the control of the media has been well in place for many decades. This is nothing new here, and it's really I have to be so thankful for shows like Coast to Coast and hosts like yourself, Ian, for just doing an incredible job to bring this out to the public, because there's a huge audience audience out there that this show is reaching. And
I think so.
These are intelligent people. These are people that have votes at their fingertips. They have the power. We all have the power as individuals to make changes. And I just don't want people to lose faith or to lose hope, because it's with radio shows and hosts like yourself, sir, that are doing the greatest service to this country. And I thank you very much for that.
Well, we'll try. I tell you, he hit on something that I want to get back to, though, which was Mark Lane.
Yes.
And here's an attorney who. And he comes up in a couple of weird places in history. He was one of the people, I believe, there at Jonestown.
Yes, he was Jim Jones' attorney, I think.
He was investigating. He had formerly been related to it, but he was investigating the Jonestown thing. He was on the plane that was heading out when the Congressman Jim Ryan, I think it was Jim Ryan, was shot, and he's one of the people that runs into the jungle. And here's Mark Lane, who at one time was at Loggerheads with your dad.
Yes.
Right? Because was it The Spectator? Was that the name of the publication that said your dad, like in 1968 or something, had said your father was one of the conspirators that killed JFK. And your dad sued successfully and won something like $680,000 or something. That's the figure that sticks out in my head. And then Mark Lane won on appeal, and your dad lost.
Yes, that's right. Mark Lane and my father were just, there was a huge rivalry going on there, and they were like bitter enemies. Mark Lane definitely put my dad through, a tremendous amount of stress in his life especially when he had him on the stand and kept hammering away at his alibi and really. It was well proven in that court of law that there was a lot of gaping
question marks,
inconsistencies about my dad's alibi.
Well, I think that was so interesting that at one point, long before your tape came out, E. Howard Hunt was denying that he was involved. He was saying exactly the opposite on the witness stand that he says in that tape.
Yeah. Well.
Okay.
Sometimes it takes nearing the end of your life to really put things in perspective and to want to come clean on things.
On the wild card line, somebody who goes by Anonymous.
Hi, I just wanted to talk to both of you and confirm everything that St. John is saying, because my father was involved in that. He's no longer living, so I feel like I can at least talk about it. I was really shocked to hear this on the coast tonight. I'm a long-time listener every weekend, and when I heard that this had come out, it confirmed everything that I know.
Well,
everything.
I appreciate that. You're going to have to give us a little bit more to work with.
The situation is that I believe, okay, this is my opinion, having grown up with my father, who is a Texan, that there is a Texas camaraderie there that is very deep. My father was friends with Governor Connolly. We moved to Washington, D.C. right before Kennedy was assassinated, and yes, Ian, I know exactly where I was when I heard that he had been assassinated. And my brother was a surgeon, a doctor, and his closest friend was an accountant at Watergate. So I've been in Washington, D.C. since '61. I was 11 years old. I was 12 when Kennedy was assassinated.
Well, let me ask you, though. I mean, and I just, what was it that your father did that you believe corroborates this story? Give us that much. If your father's dead,
yes,
fill in the blank a little bit more than.
My father worked for the military-industrial complex.
Okay, so he worked for one of the contractors
that were at the Pentagon.
Okay.
He exited the Pentagon after he brought down Nixon, and they had a midnight session of Congress, and all of the people who have been involved since Kennedy on retired. And the next thing I knew, my father was on a 32-foot sailboat, at a yacht club somewhere in the United States. And I've lived through my friends being snatched off the street, given drugs, and watched, all of that. So I've been through all of that, and I know for a fact that the tapes for Nixon, I know all about Johnson. My father knew him. I was actually married to a relative of Estes. I heard you talking about that.
Billy Sol Estes, yes, ma'am.
Yes, So
very interesting.
I've actually been involved in that, and I've worked overseas in Saudi Arabia. I'm not involved now. I live in a remote state in the United States, and I could tell you a lot of how the story continued. I don't know.
It can only be accepted as truth if more and more people corroborate it and bring forth the kind of testimony that will win over the skeptics and create the kind of logarithm that is needed in this equation to get a tipping point. And it isn't just 1 + 1 + 1 + 1, but it's got to be 1 + 1 brings in 10, brings in 100, right. That more and more people will come forward and say, well, here's my little piece of the puzzle, and then we'll take it from there.
Any other information that can corroborate this, like Mr. Douglas Caddy, who came forward to me through my emails, and
sure.
and several other people such as yourself, ma'am. If you want to,
I hope she does. She's got to do it. She's got to do it,
yeah,
and anybody
help me
else
out here,
All right, we'll get back to it, and we'll take more calls on Coast to Coast AM. Linda, you're talking with St. John Hunt.
Yes, thank you. I don't know if you're aware of it, but right after the assassination, a book was written. It's called A Texan Looks at Lyndon, and it was published by a Texas senator, and he put it in every car in Dallas one day. He really wanted this to get out. And in the book, he states that Lyndon was running for, I believe it was the state position at the time. And there was a newspaper reporter who was investigating him. Well, this man supposedly went home for lunch and shot himself in the stomach with a shotgun, which is a little hard to do, and I don't think he'd do it at lunch. And the sheriff of the county who investigated it is the one who ruled it a suicide. And Lee Harvey Oswald spent 2 weeks with this sheriff right before Dallas. And I'm sure that this Texas senator's family would give you all the proof he has of these old cover-ups. He put a copy of the book in every car in Dallas.
I appreciate that. Thank you for that.
Thank you for that information.
Wildcard line, Louis is on Coast to Coast AM for Sir St. John Hunt. Louis?
Yes, hi. I have two questions, basically. I wanted to ask you, I saw a program on, it was a number of years back when the Iran-Contra affair, a couple of years after it was done, and they were doing a news analysis on Frontline, and G. Gordon Liddy, he was interviewed. He made a very curious statement that I found curious, and, he basically called the whole thing just it was just a circus. He said the whole thing is a farce because whether it's in the NSA, he said next year or once they discover it, they'll just move it to the FBMA, whatever. He said there's always going to be a department to do the work that has to be done because there's work that the average person is not going to be able to tolerate, be able to deal with. Like you said early on in the show, put your head around. And I was curious to ask St. John if what his relationship with G. Gordon Liddy was, his father's.
What my father's relationship with Gordon Liddy was?
Yeah.
Well, I knew Gordon myself. I recall many visits with him and his wife Francine coming over to the house where I lived with my father and my mother, and he's best well known to be kind of a very sort of enthusiastic, if not slightly bizarre individual. But he was a nice man. The relationship my father had with Gordon Liddy was Gordon was a subordinate of my father in the hierarchy of during the Watergate planning, and he was an ex-Treasury guy. Chased down Tim Leary for many years, so that was their relationship. It was they were both hired by the Nixon White House to act as the plumbers to plug the leaks in the Daniel Ellsberg leaking the information about the Vietnam War to the New York Times. That's how that all started out. But he was an interesting gentleman.
And has he commented? Have you attempted to reach out to him during the process of this, the release of this tape?
No, I have not been in touch with Gordon. However, another interesting individual that I have been in touch with is Charles Colson, who was the key figure that brought my father into the White House. I emailed him asking why he was quoted in Time magazine as saying that the CIA killed Dorothy Hunt, my mother, and the email reached him. He emailed me back and said he couldn't discuss it really in any depth, but that he felt that the CIA was responsible for that and the entire Watergate the whole Watergate thing. So he has his reasons, I guess, but he's not speaking very much about it.
Was there? He just said that. He said, but it was in Time magazine that he said that. I mean,
yes,
you actually.
It's a direct quote from Time magazine. I think it's part of a larger interview. But Mr. Colson was certainly nice enough. He said he knew my mother and knew my father well, and he was sorry for my loss when my father passed away. But that he stood beside. He stood behind what he said in that interview, although he didn't want to go into it any further.
So we're talking with St. John Hunt. His website is linkable through coasttocoastam.com. When you go there, you can click out to this little part that talks about the document. It's just to the left-hand side of the screen, just to the left of the talking St. John Hunt picture. And let me ask you, it's not a big document, it's kind of a short thing, but he essentially, this is your father's handwriting, and he lays out the diagram of LBJ to David Morales, and then who's Bill Harvey? Is that what I...
William Harvey, yeah. He was a longtime CIA guy. As a matter of fact, a little interesting bit of information came to me recently that a fellow that worked under Bill Harvey in the CIA has provided an interesting memo written by Bill Harvey up through the chain in the CIA saying that when they're doing executive action work, in other words, liquidating people for the CIA, not to use American mafia types, but to go to the Corsicans for their hitmen. And as we know, Lucien Sarti, one of the people that my father mentioned to me, was a Corsican underworld hitman, a very experienced
hitman,
man.
and not mentioned on the tape by name. However, many other people, including David Morales, the photo of your dad that was taken around the same time as the photo of the tramp that was arrested, the hobo guy outside of the fence behind the grassy knoll.
Oh, right. I'm not sure I know which photo you're referring to. Is there a photo that you've seen of my dad in 1963?
There's a photo around that time. He's wearing a hat and kind of a typical photograph, maybe from the back jacket of one of his books or something. I don't know. But I have seen it where they've done a comparison shot of your father, and then just above that, the shot of the hobo, the tramp. And it's striking. And you said it yourself, right? That when the first time you saw the tramp picture and thinking about your dad, you went, my God, that looks just like my dad.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that to me, I still have that gut feeling every time I see those comparison shots. I've even seen that overlay that was in Coup d'Etat in America, that Weberman book, Canfield and Weberman, that where there's an overlay, a transparency, and it's just everything, from the tip of the nose to the point between the eyes to the, the amount of space between the nose and the upper lip. Everything just matches up so perfectly. It's just incredible.
First-time caller line, Robert, is on Coast to Coast AM. Robert, you're talking with St. John Hunt.
St. John, I think what you're doing is wonderful for the country, and it's very good for your family. There's a psychological need to tell the truth, and even for people that have been involved in wrongdoing. So I applaud you for that. What I wanted to ask you was, do you think that the work of U.S. Attorney Mark Lane in his case where he cross-examined your dad, he subpoenaed a former CIA agent who testified that she was asked to fly down from New York to Miami, drive to New Orleans to go to Houston to meet with George Herbert Walker Bush, their case officer who ran Zapata Oil Company and was involved in the Bay of Pigs, and who traveled from Houston to Dallas, I guess the day before Kennedy was killed, and so did Lyndon Johnson. But when they were on their way to Houston, they got word this team of CI people got word to divert to Dallas, and your dad and E. Howard Hunt and Sturgis were in that car. And when the woman realized what was going down, she refused. Well, she was in that courtroom with your dad when Mark Lane subpoenaed her, and she outlined who the people were in the cars, that they had sniper weapons, and that they were there at that time specifically to kill the president.
Yes, I know about that. That woman's name is Marita Lorenz. She was Fidel Castro's mistress for many years. She was also a very close and personal friend of Frank Sturgis, and she testified in that courtroom that she placed my father arriving at a motel where she and Frank and another couple of Cubans were waiting for instructions for their trip, that they had brought some guns up from Houston or from New Orleans, possibly, or from Miami. I don't recollect which was the point of origin for their mission. But in any event, she said that they were at this motel room in Dallas, and there was a knock on the door. Frank Sturgis answered the door, and in walked a man who was introduced to her as Eduardo. And now Eduardo, it was my father's nom de guerre, his sort of clandestine war name during the Bay of Pigs invasion and the planning for the Bay of Pigs. So the Cuban community knew my father as Eduardo, and that's how Frank Sturgis introduced my father to Marita Lorenz. That's who you're talking about, isn't that right, sir?
Father was the CIA's Mexico station chief during the Bay of Pigs. Frank Sturgis was a double agent under Castro, if I'm not mistaken, and escaped Castro with his life. And another defector's life about 2 weeks after they were found out.
St. John Hunt, thank you for the update, for all of the information, and for continuing to keep this story in play. And I look forward to being able to do another update with you in a couple of months.
All right. Thank you very much, Ian, for all your efforts.